So we're going to start. So I will be the moderator for this roundtable, construction, institutional and political construction of stigma in France, historical reviews and means to fight against that stigmatization. So as part of the 9th day of the scientific day of MDM, my name is Jean-François Corty. I am a doctor and also the vice president of MDM. So first of all, I would like to thank the management teams of communication and public health at MDM that have organized this event perfectly. Thank you to the team from the auditorium of Le Monde that welcome us. And thank you also to the foundation of MDM, our partner. I would like to thank also our guest speakers present today. It's an honor to have us with you today and to have you today to share your expertise and know-how. Thank you to you as well. You're very numerous here and online. And we know that there are a lot of you following us online, so of course we'll take your questions at the end of the presentations. So to delve into the topic, so we are players in the field, in the sanitary, humanitarian and environmental sector in France. And so we've been able to observe the dismantlement of the social sector and solidarity being put back into question by politicians. We can also see that there's an increase of inequalities because of that and all of the stigma of precarious and vulnerable people that are more and more vulnerable because of the system that is in place. The immigration law also led to a lot of debate in which the migrants were actually seen and used as scapegoats. So how can we explain this marginalization of precarious people, sex workers, drug users, when we know that when it comes to public health, the more we have inequalities, the more the society's condition is bad. What about the security challenges and public challenges? So if we go back in history when it comes to the figures of precarity, and if we try and have a look at what happened at the political level, but also if we try and have a look at the research, what has been done by researchers, the idea is to have a look at how can we defend a project of a society in which policies are based on human rights and on which we have a welfare state that includes everyone.
On a un panel de très très haut niveau. On est très ému encore une fois, et moi je suis très ému.
So I'm delighted to have Cécile with us. You are specializing in social policies, and you work at the UNDHC as well. So you'll tell us a bit more about this institution. Marie-Caroline Saglio-Yatzimirsky, thank you so much for being here. You're an anthropologist and a clinician as well. It's not the first time that you participate in a roundtable for MDM, and it's a delight to have you back here. You've also been writing several books, and I think a novel a year ago or 2 years ago called Bombay. Finally, we have Patrick Boucheron with us today. Thank you so much for being here. So you're a professor at the Collège de France when it comes to the history of powers in Western Europe in between the 13th and 15th century. So you've been writing many books as well, and it's always such a pleasure to have you with us and to listen to your reflections. So thank you so much for being with us today. It's such an honor to have you here. So every speaker is going to speak for about 15 to 20 minutes. I'll ask questions. And of course, right after, we'll have a Q&A session as well for the people that are in the room, but also for those that are online. So without further ado, Patrick, we'll start with you. So I'm going to turn to you. You're a historian. You're specialized in Middle Ages, in the Middle Ages period. What can we learn from history when it comes to the stigma of precarity? This is something that we could observe at the time, and it's something
that we are able to observe nowadays as well. And so when we were preparing this roundtable, you told me about those archaic ghosts that are sort of coming back into our societies. What can we learn from history? Well, hi everyone, and thank you so much, Jean-François, for this invitation. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm honored to be part of this discussion. I'm going to try and be quite brief as well, also because it's not such a good news if the opinion of a historian specialized in Middle Ages can actually sound relevant to talk about what's happening today, because it does mean that something's not working, and because something is not working, we might want to call it archaic or a ghost or a spectrum. You might be tempted to call it as something from the past, and it can call back from very ancient times. I remember a historian on witchery, for example. He was talking about political processes at the time. And he was also specialized in the Inquisition period, so of course it wasn't such a good news to have him on stage speaking about global affairs. So of course I would rather be here as an historian of medieval times and talk about that period of time, but that's not why I'm here. And so how not to be desperate, because of course we are talking about the stigma, we're talking about biases and misconceptions relating to poverty and precarity. And, you know, stigma is usually comes back. And as Carlo Gisborg was doing it, we could say that this is archaic because this is something that recalls the past. And so this is why we always use it as scapegoat. It's something, you know, the scapegoat is pretty much the same. It's never been proven. It's not something that is established, but it gives us an image of what we don't want, of what we're afraid of. So when we are going through turmoil, when we're encountering difficulties, we'll always find someone that we find is weaker, and we are going to impose our guilt on them. So the right way to do things when it comes to the social aspect is the title of this roundtable, actually. So it's all about political construction, institutional construction of stigma. And it would be too easy to say that we have scapegoats just because we're not modern enough. We are very modern. I mean, the borders that we have are, you know, machines that kill. I'm not saying that this is a fruit of modernity, but I think this is something that we've aggravated. And this is also why we are modern. We're modern also because we stigmatize foreigners. And this is maybe there that my role as a historian could just stop. I could be limited to that. And I think that historians should actually have a look at the gap that we have in between the past and the present. And there is a way of there's a way in which our society is constructing the inhospitality. And we might talk about this further with Marie-Caroline, but there is this feeling of being worn out, that there's no longer this willingness or this energy. It feels that we're a bit more cruel or a bit more aggressive. That is really specific to us. It is that we are politically organizing, and we're organizing at a scale that could be useless. Being a historian doesn't give me all of the knowledge to understand everything that is happening today. In the past, we were talking about the history of the poor and the marginal as well. For example, you have historians specialized in poverty in older times, and he could also be
du syndicat Solidarność, on a pu croire effectivement que l'un allait aider l'autre.
So at some point, we could have believed that the one would be helping the others, but it's not as an historian that I'm here today. I like to be here as a citizen, and I think that we'll be talking about this, and I think, Marie-Caroline, you're well aware of that, but we are in a very peculiar position at the moment. So a person like me, and I might be a bit brutal here, but we're taken care of. We are civil servants for life. Nobody's, annoying us. So we'll get funding for research, to talk about migration, talk about stigma, and in exchange, this social science knowledge is not going to be taken into consideration. This is an unsaid agreement, actually, but you know what I mean. There's this real rupture in between what we do and politicians, and I think this is also something that we can now observe in sciences as well, for toxicology, phytosanitary questions, environmental sciences. We know what we should do. We are paid to document, and people smile at us when they tell us very frankly that they won't really care about the results because they won't take it into consideration. And so the research is supposed to be neutral. Is that what you're being told or explained? Yes. So now the idea is, what do we do? And I might go a bit beyond my own knowledge and my own skills, but what do we do then? And what do we do? Well, we do exactly what we're doing here today, talking to the society, talking to the active society, to all of you that are attending here today, to encourage you, to support you, and to equip you with this new knowledge, to equip you morally but also politically. And here again, if we take the role of intellectuals, you have two roles. You have the organic role and the critical role. So you have a philosopher, for example, such as Foucault, that considered the questions that you're working on. He was considering that those questions were, critical questions that we had to discuss about. For example, the migration crisis is a critical moment of our era that we needed to discuss. So Foucault was saying that this was on this question that we should be reflecting. And so we consider that from that point in time, we'll see what will be told of us. And so he wanted to be the critical and intellectual of that critical case. And so you also had those organic people that were trying to get closer to the people that had the power. And they actually preferred talking to the public opinion, to the collective intelligence. And so they were doing so because he knew that people were doing things a bit differently. And he was being quite successful. And I think this is pretty much the path that I followed. I've never, been giving my expertise or my advice. But I knew that other people were playing another game. And that, as a whole, we had a very efficient and active structure. But nowadays, everything is unbalanced. And to make sure that we're not only here to speak to the same people, we're here to be talking to associations, to citizens, to organizations. But I think it's important to show that we need to be able to act. But if you are too far from power, if you're too far from where decisions are made, I'm not saying this is useless, but the efficiency of your fight is going to be weakened up until it's completely worn out. Yeah, this is what a sociologist was saying once. I mean, if we're talking about the figure that you were talking about, when we talk about fights that are based on human rights, we have lefties that are usually working in associations and they're not in power. But it is true that this is at the National Assembly that decisions are being made. And there is a problem about where power is and how we can access it.
Du changement politique et historique, c'est-à-dire que si effectivement être historienne ou historien, c'est essayer de comprendre en quoi aujourd'hui.
So if being a historian means trying to understand how the present differs from the past, then we might always just talk about the past and get scapegoats and try to just not take on our responsibilities. I think there is a huge gap in between the past and the present, and I think we should just own it. We should just own the difference and the differences. And yes, there is some sort of an accusatory side of things. Those policies that are stigmatizing populations. This is not a machine. There are people that decide to do or not to do, to listen or not to hear. And I think that, and this is what I've suggested in one of my books, it is important to stop thinking that we are on the edge of a huge catastrophe, because somehow the disaster already happened. And the disaster is what already happened, but this is also what keeps on going. So this is the continuum of the worst, up until we can't find a way to fix it. And I think this is exactly what's happening today. And I think it's sorts of relaxing to think, let's not be afraid of something that's coming towards us, because it already happened. And you were talking about the immigration law, and I think that things could get even worse, to be honest. But you know, I can't see into the future. You were talking of historians, you were talking about dates, how important dates are. And I think at some point that a date makes sense up until it doesn't make sense anymore. And I think it's important at some point to just try and set a threshold, set a limit. And I think that we can all agree that the worst thing that we're afraid of already happened in December 2023 with the migration law. And if historians of the future needs a pivotal date, I think this is a great date to remember. Thank you so much, Patrick. And you actually make my job easier, because this is a great transition for Marie-Caroline Saglio-Yatzimirsky, who's the director of the Migration Convergence Institute. And so I was wondering, what's the use of the scapegoat? Why do we use migrants as a scapegoat? What's the use of it? To whom it is useful? I was so interested in what Patrick was saying, and I had no idea we were going to go and talk about to some psychoanalysis. You know, you have to be ready for everything at MDM. Exactly, but this is true that the past is coming back to the surface. We have all of our concerns, our worries, and yes, some essential questions were asked, especially when it comes to the role of certain stakeholders, especially when we talk about migration. We also talked a lot about the role of researchers. What's the stake of research nowadays? But maybe my perspective is a bit different, especially when it comes to this law, the event, and the catastrophe. Yes, the catastrophe occurred, it happened, but I have the feeling that this political scandal, the words that are being used, I mean, the debate is a circus, and I think at some point this is just too much. I mean, we should have a look at the sociology of the Senate. Who's making the laws? I mean, who decided to take on that text, that law? I mean, we have youngsters that don't vote that much, but they're really committed when it comes to migration matters. So I think there's a gap here, and there is a population that actually live that migration matter. There's also what associations, organizations, and carers can see directly in the field. There is what people that are committed actually do, and then we have this law, this policy that is completely out of context and completely absurd. I'm not historian, so I'm not saying that this law project became a law. It was actually enshrined. And yes, it is a catastrophe. Maybe the catastrophe is already here. And I think that everything is disturbed. All types of narratives are at the same level nowadays. Could be about migration, about medicine, about anything. And it's not because I'm a researcher that I actually feel that I have this superior voice. It's not true. We have more and more narratives that are just going against each other. They are competing against each other. And so in the end, you have a media narrative and a right-wing narrative that are extremely elaborated, are extremely strong. And so I think that's what's important, is to come and shake things up on the political arena, because I think there are several ways to interpret things. For example, this parity committee was censored on 32 different articles by the Constitutional Council. So we know that this is a lot about the procedure itself. And so in the end, what happened is that, well, there is a limit. All right, there's a little limit here.
Non, vas-y, on a le temps.
So going back to what was said around the construction of the political and institutional construction. So what history is telling us, what the research is telling us, and in my institute, we have 700 researchers working on migration. They work together as a network. All of the studies, economical, etc., all the research shows that migrants, well, migrants are considered to be scapegoats, that migrants, well, the definition has evolved, the vision has evolved a lot, and it depends a lot on the political contexts. Refugees themselves had different faces. Then political migrants were welcomed by our asylum law. We could have imagined another type of reception, and maybe welcoming those who are dying from hunger. That's a good reflection on what the society is ready to do and who is ready to welcome. So we have different types of representations in the political system. So we have those we have to welcome and those who we should not. And so since the beginning of the 1980s, we've changed the paradigm, because in the past we used to welcome a lot of workers from different countries because the working market was needing those workers. And today, everything's suspicious. You know, when you are welcoming refugees, we receive them only if they can prove something or something else. During the Cold War, we were welcoming everyone who would like to get asylum in our country. And for Ukrainians, we have to say that it was quite different. It was a very interesting issue, especially for this construction. Because first, it shows that we are capable, in terms of means at least, and at least there is, if there is a political decision, we are capable to welcome people. We were able to welcome 100,000 people. The state really wanted to welcome those people. The state did it. And, you know, the possibility to remove the obstacles, the levers to inclusion, the access to housing, to health. This is something, you know, that deters people from coming to our countries and to be integrated. So if you remove those levers, if you give more protection, temporary protection to a specific type of population, then you can understand why we haven't done so. We had the Syrian population, the Afghan population, and we had those instruments of temporary protection. We didn't use them. So it means that we were able to put back in the array of the public space who we want to welcome. And we have the means, so it depends on political decisions. And so we were able here to launch a debate. And that's an experience that leads us to rethink of our political and institutional construction. And it's true that it's quite sad to explain figures, to write articles that do not take into account when making decisions at the political level. Of course, the challenge of research, the goal of research is to create a political public debate with legislators and decision makers. It's a big challenge. We also have a lot of requests coming so that we continue to produce some studies without passion that can be used as a lever for certain types of actions, because the main actors, the main players are the ones that are on the field, caregivers, etc., humanitarian workers. And so we need a community, a thinking community around a reality. And unfortunately, because of the election landscape, we do not focus on that. And we are also part of a... We're not the only ones to make the decision.
Etc. Tout ce qui est pris, tout ce qui est décidé au niveau du pacte européen.
So we have a European pact. And to me, the catastrophe is there in Europe, a change of paradigm in which we are not in a sorting strategy that has been well installed in France. Who are the migrants that we want to welcome and why? Today, we are following a logic according to which France and the other 27 countries of Europe are, building borders, building walls. So they want to externalize everything outside of those borders by creating a security, system. We know that the borders are deadly, and the more borders we close, the more people die at the borders. It is mechanical. And to me, this is the catastrophe that is happening today. So it means that we are part of a construction that is completely opposite to everything, is contrary to everything that we've been followed for migration issues, and the ones that we followed for thousands of years. And the fact that we are locking up, that we are creating walls, that is now a real paradigm. It's an outbreak. We started with Greece and Turkey. We started to externalize, and Italy did the same with Libya. Then France followed suit. Then we had Rwanda in England. It's a case study, I would say, when it comes to the gap. It's something that is completely outside of the reality. Denmark is going to follow suit as well, probably, in Germany. So it means that Europe do not want any migrants anymore. And it's quite risky. And I'm strongly convinced, otherwise I won't be here, that research can be useful if research means that we collaborate with other players, other stakeholders, and that we are on the ground, on the field. Otherwise, of course, it is weightless. And I'm convinced that this type of, event can enable us to go further and to go into that direction. So it's when we do not comply with the rights, when we do not respect rights, when we are working with, Libya, so that they, contain the problem, we violated moral rules and rights. And there is another question I'd like to ask you, Cécile. So there are measures that are, increasing the number of deaths, and we also have some organizations that are part of the problem. We were accused for several times. MESEF too was accused of being a criminal organization because, we are saving people's lives at sea. And, NGOs are considered to be a problem because they are working with the authorities and the smugglers. So maybe it echoes some type of radicality that, does not touch upon this idea specifically, but that touches upon the whole democracy system. Yes, you're totally right, and there were a lot of reflections around, for example, the nature of who we are going to protect as a refugee. So we were afraid by communism, and now we are afraid of Islam. It's quite ambiguous. And what you're saying on criminalization, yes, that's a tool. That's a major tool to limit the actions on the field of organizations and associations. And it echoes two events. You've read the news, for example, 27 migrants that died a few years ago in the Channel, and not to accuse the French state, we are using, a testimony of someone who was not feeling okay, and that would let the boat enter the British Sea. And once again, here we can see that we are violating rights. And we've been doing so anytime we were talking about migratory rights. And we don't even appeal to human rights. When you use tear gas and when you attack people, migrants, you know that you put their lives at risk. And we're talking about Gendarmerie Nationale, So I think that we are reaching extremes. that are denounced by the few possibility of reactions that we have. But you are totally right. We are in a logic that criminalizes the organizations. They are used as a lever. We are also militarizing the borders. It is quite systematic. So these are tools that are used. And whether you're in the mountains, at sea, on the field, the tool to violate rights and human rights is systematically used when we talk about migratory issues. That's the norm. Thank you so much. That's a great transition. So now we're going to listen to you, Cécile. You're the Deputy General Secretary of the Human Rights National Consultative Commission. So what is your role? What is your social mission? So it's not very well known by the general public and by the associations, even though that's a very old organization. It's been created in 1945 by René Cassin, who also participated in the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And so its mandate is very broad. It's been the case since the very beginning. So a big mandate when it comes to making sure that human rights are respected in France, and when it comes to the respect of the international human rights and the humanitarian law as well. And so the Commission gives advices to the different institutions when it comes to promoting human rights in France. So control as well. France has joined a lot of conventions and signed different treaties on human rights, and so this commission aims at controlling that those texts, those treaties are being implemented by the French law. And it is also related with the controls and the checkups implemented by the European Council and the United Nations. So we work hand in hand with those international organizations that can then impose fines on France. And we also have a third mission, education to human rights. It's a very broad mission. It's complicated for us to implement that, but we're doing the best we can. It's a mission for the whole population from birth to death. And so we are trying to develop education tools for the youngest, to have trainings in schools for professionals. So it's a big field of work. I was about to forget something. So in line with the three missions, we also have 5 specific mandates according to the law, according to specific plans for specific matters. For example, the fight against anti-Semitism, xenophobia, and racism. We have a mandate on humanitarian law, and we're also in charge of implementing this by the Red Cross. We also have a commission on the evaluation of public policies against human trafficking, and also a mandate to fight against discriminations for disabled people and LGBTQA+ populations. And we have a plural component. It's quite unique. We have 64 members in 3 colleges. We have 1 college from the civil society, and so MDM is a member of that college. We have 30 representatives of organizations and trade unions. So representative trade unions for employees or for employers. And we have organizations, so generalist organizations like Amnesty International France or Ligue des Droits de l'Homme, or more specific organizations to fight for the rights of LGBTQI populations, children, migrant populations, women's rights, and disabled people. So we have 30 representatives from the civil society. Then we have a second college, a college of qualified people. So we're talking about people that have been selected for their expertise in the field of human rights. So we can have magistrates, lawyers, teachers, historians, sociologists. And one specificity here at this college, we have also representatives from the biggest religions in France, Catholicism, Judaism, and Islam. And we also have a college with one senator, one member of parliament, one representative of the CEE, and a representative for rights. So we have an assembly of members that work independently. So our institution is a public institution, but it's independent. And we don't get any orders or directives from the public authorities. And so we are completely free. So we can choose the topics we want to work on. I hope that was clear. I have a question for you, even though I shouldn't ask it right now. Do people, follow what you're saying? Do they follow your recommendations? Are you heard? And in concrete terms, how do you, recommend the drafting of policies that respect human rights to fight against stigma, for example? So we have different working methods. The goal is to make sure that people and the government understands, and not only the government, but also the administrations that are in charge of implementing different types of policies, that it is important to make sure that human rights are at the heart of public actions. Not only because of a moral imperative or of a legal imperative, because, France needs to comply with the treaties it signed, but because it is better for public policies after all. So we are working with the administrations, with the government, to promote a human rights-based approach. So it's been launched at the end of the 1980s by the United Nations first, and it aims at placing human rights, and so people, in the end, at the center of public action. So I think that is something that you are, practicing on a daily basis in your actions as an organization. But we need to formalize this to make sure that it is implemented by administrations and elected officials. So the goal is to present to the authorities, to the administrations, one objective, which is ensuring human rights to everyone in France and ensuring a process that leads to the implementation of certain principles. So we have 5 principles in total. I'm going to talk about them very briefly. I'm so sorry. I need my notes, contrary to my 2 colleagues. Don't worry. So we have a process for public policies drafting, and to make sure that they are efficient and that they respect human rights, we need to focus on participation, responsibility, non-discrimination, empowerment, and the respect of international standards. So I'm not going to enter the details on the principles of non-discrimination and compliance with international standards because, it's quite clear. But I would like to develop the other 3. So participation principle and responsibility principle. And I left behind the third one. So first, participation. This principle was created to compensate for the malfunctionings of the policies drafted in the 1980s. because the processes used relied on strategies that were developed by development agencies or private donors that would then establish their priorities based on the supposed needs of the population. So it means that the needs were defined at a superior level, and then it was a top-bottom approach, and we were missing the target and the actions were not efficient in the end. So making sure that public actions rely on the participation of the people that are firstly concerned is something that will prove to be efficient. But the participation principle is quite demanding, but because it's not only about associating concerned populations in an artificial way, let's organize a consultation, and then let's implement my public policy. No. We really need that participation to meet different requirements. First of all, deliver clear knowledge adapted to all the types of consultations possible, implementing the favorable conditions that will enable people to speak and to be heard. We give them the opportunity to speak and we need to listen to them. And we should not use, technical problems as an excuse not to give a voice to those people. And saying, it's better to listen to the experts because they know better. We also need the consultation to be durable. It needs to be implemented and thought prior to the creation of public policies for the people that would benefit from those policies to be fully part of the decision-making process. And finally, orientations and conclusions that will be created after this consultation needs to be taken into account by the public authorities. The participatory approach needs to be taken seriously by the authorities. We very often criticize that process because, it puts into question the decision-making power of the political side of things. Yet, this approach does not impose to the authorities to take into account the results of this consultation. They just have to, read the results, and if there are some differentiations in between the orientations, what was created by the consultation, what was created by the public authorities, then the public authorities need to justify the gap in between the consultation results and the decisions made. And the second pillar I wanted to talk to you about is the pillar of responsibility. Public authorities need to justify their decisions, and they need to evaluate the policies that they have implemented. And this evaluation needs to rely on specific indicators that are known to everyone and indicators that take into account human rights. So that evaluation enables us to say, okay, we've reached the objectives, we made progress when it comes to the field of human rights protection. I hope it was clear enough. No, it was really clear. Thank you. So let's go back to my previous question. So earlier we talked about the meaning, the purpose, the practice, of research. It's not useful maybe if we're not listened to. So do you have an influence on decision-making people to make sure that human rights are being respected? I'm quite optimistic. So, yes, I think that we can be listened to, that political decision makers listen to us, even though it's not easy. It requires a lot of time and effort. I've been working for this agency for more than 20 years now, and in 20 years' time, I was able to see that recommendations or proposals that we had were taken into account in the administrations, public administrations, and in the policies. And I read some recommendations from the committee that were enforced in practice. It takes a lot of time. It depends on the fields of expertise as well. Which, to be clear about this, we have big successes in terms of, fighting against xenophobia, anti-Semitism, and racism. Even though, I don't say here that it's gone and we don't have any problems anymore. But the measures that are implemented to fight against racism are more co-built. The recommendations of the Commission are taken into account, at least more. We have a good success when it comes to human trafficking as well. The issue of human trafficking was invisible a few years ago. Organizations really fought against it. We had specific organizations on this topic as well, but it was not an issue on the agenda of the political forces. We drafted a lot of reports, we drafted a lot of recommendations on this, and so the topic emerged. And today we have a public policy against human trafficking, and this policy has been co-built with the organizations. So in some fields, we are listened to, and we are making progress. Of course, for some topics, they don't listen to us at all, and migration is one of them, for example. It raises a lot of questions, and it's quite of a failure for us. We are never heard when it comes to migratory policies. There is... they don't want to listen to us. The Ministry of the Interior doesn't listen to us. And whatever the government, migrant people have no rights. We can't convey the following message, migrant people are people and they have fundamental rights and their rights should be respected. So it's a two-standard, a measure. It means that on one side we have men and women, and then we have men and women that have no rights, It's not, formulated like this, but this is the main conclusion that we have. We have French citizens, and we have people that are not French citizens, at least from the administrative point of view. And when we are explaining, it's just an administrative status, human rights have nothing to do with citizenship or an administrative situation. We're talking about human rights that belong to people, to humans. So it means that everyone should see their rights respected. And here it's a huge problem to make people understand that. I think that we can give a big round of applause to our three panelists for the first sequence. So we have some time left. We have 30 minutes to exchange with you. So we have some microphones in the room. Do not hesitate to raise your hand. And I think I have one question for you. In the chat, because we have a chat. So what about citizens and civil society organizations? Because the main sources of information, are feeding into discrimination. Thinking of the survey of Mediapart on fake news, broadcast by CNews. So we have an environment where we have, fake news and real news, and we don't know how to evolve in that type of environment. It's an open question, of course.
So who wants to take that question? Well, of course, this is a question that is at the center of the way we work and what we do. And just wanted to take a couple minutes to say that the Migration Agency is not only dedicated to research, they also do a lot of trainings, continuous training, initial trainings as well, with this migration masters that we have at the EHESS in Paris. And we also have a lot of different degrees that now exist on these issues. Those are important initiatives. It's really important to be able to underline this. We have about 40 universities that help out young migrants to actually study. And so this is what helps out some people to get back into the university circuit. And here in the institute, the idea is to work with the society and in the public debate. And we're trying to be as cautious as possible because we are supported by the National Research Center. There's a lot of knowledge production, and as you said, we're talking of a knowledge that is usually neutral. It's not based on a specific methodology or on a precise methodology, and we should be able to talk about these issues without always having the political spectrum in the way. So we have to fight against fake news. We work with institutes that precisely work on these matters. I'm thinking of the migration infox, for example, fake news. Sorry, that works specifically on that topic with public stakeholders and public players. And so, of course, I think we've reached a high. So we are at a moment in which we're able to bear the fact that many people die at the border, the fact that human rights are being violated. This is something that we sort of accept. And I think this is unacceptable that we reached that point. I mean, it is unacceptable as well for people to have to wait for 6, 7, or 8 years to actually get documents. And if you look at the investigation called ELIPA from the Ministry of the Interior, that shows what happens in the first few years of integration of people that actually come into France. This investigation shows that from the moment a migrant arrives in France, from the moment that the migrant gets their rights will be violated within the first 12 months. So it is impossible for them to have access to their fundamental rights. And it feels that everybody accepts that situation. And so what I wanted to say is that fortunately, research is a partner. We have other partners than the Ministry of the Interior, that we do work a lot on health with public actors, with public players, to make sure that we can make observation, that we can raise awareness, that we can collect data, and that this data can be used for advocacy, that we're able to have figures that can be analyzed, and then give the figures to players that are able to work on advocacy and to just rely on this data to keep on moving forward and to keep on trying and make some change. And I think having these figures, having this observation is paramount if we want to be able to measure things and to analyze the situation. I think the big challenge that we've had in the past was to do this partnership with France Terre d'Asile so that we could work on mental health of refugees, of exiled people living in camps. I mean, it made sense. It made sense, and I think it still makes sense. And I think it's important that we keep on researching on these topics. I mean, we do get subsidies. We are supported by the Ministry of Interior, and they offer us to analyze these figures. And I mean, we could imagine that in 2027, we will have even less social dialogue if we keep on going straight to a wall as we are now. But I do think that research, if research is linked to what's happening in the field, if it's co-built with different players, with different stakeholders, I think it is useful. Yes, I just wanted to add a few words regarding this this question, and thank you, Cécile, because I am optimistic too. You know, deep down, because we couldn't believe you. Yeah, but exactly. This is also why I wanted to try and show that I'm a bit optimistic. I'm not saying that this is a catastrophe that's going to repeat itself over and over again. Maybe we'll be able to overcome this and go much further than this. Maybe that people won't want for this catastrophe to repeat itself, because we only have knowledge and we only have the law. Those are the only things that we can base ourselves off of. And I agree, Marie-Caroline, that we're never wasting time when we produce knowledge. You know, knowledge production is not a waste of time. Because it does help to implement specific measures, and if authorities do not want to enforce measures, well, usually citizens are the one to do the work. And yes, legislation is one of the main obstacles. So, I mean, the question's right. The question from the chat, I mean, it's just that, you know, when they're talking about CNews, they're saying this is the most popular channel. It is not true. It is the most supported, so it's the most funded by very powerful people that have a political agenda, an ideology agenda. Let's not be naive. They are declaring war. This is a cultural war that we have to fight against at the moment. I mean, we are in the auditorium of a big newspaper that have the means to actually fight this war. And if we want to talk about racism, I mean, of course, there are more and more racist narratives in France, but you work with anthropologists, with sociologists. I mean, they have figures. They have figures in which they see the number of mixed marriage, for example, and all the data converge towards the same direction. The French society is not racist. The French society can hear racist narratives that will, you know, end up maybe that will end up convincing them that they are racist. But it's not true. Let's not oppose the beauty of principles with what's actually happening, with the reality of the practices that we're able to observe. In France, there is no segregation. There is no racial segregation such as we have in the US, for example. And again, let's look at the figures. I mean, if we look at the figures when it comes to mixed marriage for demography specialists, this is one of the best data that we can have. I mean, of course, we can compare over time, we can compare with other countries, but this is something that really gives us a good idea of society. And, you know, I work a lot on Italy, and I think it's really interesting. We're not interested in Italy anymore. I mean, there is an Italian lab on modernity. We do have chaos engineers. So, yeah, so, you know, we can read what Berlusconi says. Okay, it's interesting. Yes, there are a lot of authoritarian powers, a lot of authoritarian countries that start by having people in power taking over the media and so on. But this is where we're at today. I mean, you know, with the right wing and the extreme right wing, this is exactly what we see happen. And this is something that is happening right here in Europe. And, you know, the Fifth Republic in Italy, we've had so many authoritarian digressions. But Meloni is going to lose. I mean, she has a very brutal and cruel policy towards migrants, towards exiled people. But she cannot apply this policy unless she gets out of the EU. I mean, she can't really get out of the EU either. So we live with a society, and I'm sorry, but it doesn't. This society is not the way it is shown by CNews, and this is a right society. So yes, of course, we can be optimistic. Cécile, do you want to react to that, or should we take another question? I just want to confirm what was said on the fact that France is not a racist country. So at the Human Rights Council, we are able to rely on a study since 1970 that is conducted every single year by experts in politics. And we can see that since 1990, tolerance is actually increasing. The vast majority of the French is not racist. The vast majority of the French has none of the biases, none of the misconceptions that are actually broadcasted by the media. I can see other questions in the room. I can see a lot of people up top. Yes, hi, I work for the Secours Catholique Caritas France, and I wanted to bounce back on what you said when it comes to production of scientific knowledge. At some point, you talked about the fact that research, the academy, needs to work hand in hand with associations. And so I was wondering, in that case, who's producing the knowledge when there is this cooperation? Is this a knowledge? Is this the question of knowledge production, or is it just a cross-disciplinary work? When we're talking about this with associations such as mine, we usually talk about aggregating, about crossing, about comparing the knowledge. Knowledge comes from the association, knowledge from people that are vulnerable. This is what we're devoted to. So we do want to produce knowledge, but sometimes we don't use the same words, right? We don't use the same narratives. And I think that sometimes, even when if we're committed to fight the same fights, sometimes we use different words. And when we look into trying to hear each other and try and implement new ideas, people in the field don't feel like they're always heard by the academy, by academicians. And so I was wondering, what's your point of view on this cooperation in between players in the field and universities? Thank you for your question. Second question over there. Yes, hi. I have a political question, actually, because you talked about the Society of Rights and and you also talked about the rule of law, and we could see that this is something that is not going in the right direction at the moment. And Patrick, you said as well that we're talking about a machine with someone mastering the machine. You also talked about youngsters that are really committed, that really take part in different associations and organizations, but that do not vote. And so I was wondering, are we getting to a society in which we no longer work with the state and we work just in between us? And so what can we do to try and converge everything? Because as a doctor, for example, we're not supposed to do politics. But if we start doing politics, it usually doesn't end well. So that's that's pretty much my question. Are you thinking of ministers that become plastic surgeons? Is that what you are referring to? I think we have questions for everyone. We have two fantastic questions. Knowledge production, cooperation in between different players and the state, and what can you say to that first question? Well, I'll just say, I think that, today being a carer is one of the most political profession that you get, as political as you get, especially today. If I go back to your question now, this is a fascinating question that is really at the heart of our research, actually. Next week will be about there will be about 50 of us from the institute to conduct the Confront workshop in Calais. So we work with the platform Service Migrant on that project. But so we basically work with over 40 different associations. And so yes, it changed. So we can talk about research action. We can call it exactly the way you want. But I don't feel like there is a hierarchy in between academicians and players in the field, because I don't think that having a hierarchy here makes any sense in the field. Here we're talking about a different way of conducting research today. When we work on contemporary migrations, we work on fields that could be the ones of Caritas or Secours Catholique, as you said, but I also worked with Ventimille, with Caritas, for example, and I know that, for me, this is something that is quite obvious, but we are working on life and death matters when we are talking about migrants. So whether you are a health provider, when we're talking about the new migration paths that open or routes, it's always a question of life or death. So when we're faced with these issues, and if we think about tuberculosis, for example, that gets in Lampedusa, that goes back to Turin, and then it comes back to France, all of this can be a matter that we research at the Institute. And I think at some point all researchers sort of had to renew their methodology, and they had to reflect back on what it actually means to work with people that are in the field, so people that work in associations, for example, because these people, they have access to migrants, but they also have access to sources that we might not have access to as academicians. So I think that it really helped renew the kind of research that we do. We don't only compare data, we work on different types of knowledge nowadays. We work hand in hand with all of the association players, and we might not work towards the same goal. You know, a researcher works to get data, to get information. A health provider works to heal, and we can imagine that someone working in an association works towards another goal. But I truly think, I'm convinced that we can renew our knowledge by cooperating with other players. Maybe just a few words regarding the rule of law and a lawful society. When it comes to migrants, it is true that we might have a lot of questions. I mean, everything seems to be aligned. At some point, when my colleague told me, you know, there's no problem with migrants. I mean, there's no problem. Nobody wants migrants. So, you know, the issue's just, there's no issue if nobody wants them. It's already fixed. Problem solved. So yes, we do have intense opinions, but within the state, and this is what Sylvain Laurence showed actually, he described those machinists. He showed that since 1973, at the end of work migration, the Ministry of the Interior, because I mean they're always in the picture, and then of course we have Nicolas Sarkozy is going to change all of the prefects and so on, and so everything's still here now. But this political change there is the base, the genesis of the policy that we have today. And maybe, Cécile, you stop me if I'm mistaken, but you're optimistic. But here, on this point, you're saying that we're not able to make it. We're not making it. It just doesn't work. So I'm not saying that it's a lost cause. I'm just saying that it should help us to actually draw observations, to learn. We should learn from that experience. I mean, yes, you talked about the joint committee. You know, and the joint committee is just working on complete different topics here and there. And the whole system of that committee is quite absurd, I have to say. And I'm saying that I don't think there is any fate. We are in a political society in which the debate, and that's why we're here and that's why we're debating, that debate can actually be fruitful. We can actually get things out of debates. I mean, we've been able to see opinions, you know, the opinion change overnight. If you look at in the US, for example, you had women activists that were saying, you know, the abortion ban would never happen. And so now they have to change strategy because, as you can see, there's sort of, you know, the wind turned overnight here. Yeah, so we need to protect as well research. Cécile, you wanted to say something? Yes, that was regarding the second question, actually. I'm not sure that doctors or health providers or people working in associations, I don't think they should get into politics. But there is one thing that you can do, is that you can talk about rights. You can fight for people's rights. You can go to courts, and I think that even though the rule of law is being under attack, it is still there, it is still standing, and it is still efficient. And we can see that when associations are going to court, are filing, whether it's at the tribunal, whether it's at the Human Rights European Court, it is efficient, and sometimes it looks like it's so far away and it takes such a long time and it's so costly, and it is true, but it does work. Having someone being condemned by the state or by the Human Rights Court, European Human Rights Court, this has an impact. This shows that this is working. In this migration law that we've been debating about. I mean, there are so many dispositions that are catastrophic, but there is one thing regarding the ban on minor retention, underage retention. And for this point, we can say thank you to the European Human Rights Court, because they've censored the French government on that. So I do think that this is a tool that you can use as a citizen. Yeah, I think it's great that you can remind that. And thank you so much for reminding us of that. Maybe we'll take one last question. You talked about the Senate, and before you were already saying that it was difficult to share knowledge, and I wanted to talk about the Economic, Social, Environmental Committee. It's not so well known, and I don't think about the possibility of actions there. What do you think about it? It's rather a comment, actually, MDM. When it comes to filing, when it comes to litigation, I think we have to be careful, though, because we can see that we win one time out of two, and sometimes even when we win, we actually lose. So I think it's really important to build up a proper case if we want to litigate, and I think we need to be a bit more cautious than we used to be. And, other people know how to master the tools much more than we do at the moment. Any other comment? Agnès? Yes, I wanted to comment on what Yannick was saying. I am a field player. I work in Nice, very near to Menton and Vintimille. So when it comes to the limit of the rule of law, yes, I mean, we can enshrine a lot of different things in the law. But there is a difference in between the law and the law being enforced by the Alpes-Maritimes prefecture. I mean, the prefecture of my department has been condemned many times, I don't even know how many times, for refusing to let people in, for underage people retention. Every single day, they just violate the laws that are in place. So I do feel that the rule of law is strongly limited in practice in our daily lives. And even when we go to litigation, when there is sentences given because of the housing issue, it doesn't change anything for the Alpes-Maritimes prefecture. It never changes. They keep on refusing for people to get in, and that's illegal. And they do that 20 times a day. There are people being condemned because they actually welcome people in their home, but we don't have enough housing, social housing there, because the communes are not respecting the quota of social housing that should be built. So people keep on living in the streets. So I do hear your speech. I do hear your speech. Okay, thanks to us, we've been able to enshrine this in the law. That's great, but the law is not enforced. And when are we going to enforce it? And what can we do for it to be enforced properly? Any questions? I don't know if there is any specialist of the Environmental, Social and Economic Council. I mean, yes, it is true, but if we didn't have that, it would be worse. Do you know what I mean? I mean, yes, this isn't much, but this is better than nothing. And maybe if the law is not applied properly, fines should be of proportion. Maybe a couple of words. It's quite interesting to actually listen to you because, yes, on these topics, several years back, maybe at the time we would have said something. Maybe we would have talked about civil disobedience when it comes to migrants. So associations, for example, that would go against the law, but being aware of going against the law, and they would just take on the responsibility. They would just ignore the law, and this is what we called security back in the 18th century. So this is what ensures the security of citizens, safety of citizens, so to protect citizens from the state, from the government. And because of the rule of law is under attack at the moment, we tend to defend institutions, whether social institutions, political institutions, associative institutions, academics, and so on. So we tend to defend institutions, and everybody says they should all do their job, what they're meant for. And of course, even though we went a bit backwards, we're not facing a wall at the moment. We know that the political sphere is mistreating different categories of people, and the President of the Republic, for example, wanted to create a new presidential council for science, and most people said no thanks. No thanks. We already have institutions like this. We have enough of them. They're representative, and we want now to be part of these institutions. This is what we could do. So, for example, doctors should do the same. I don't know. I mean, at the time, I mean, I'm old enough to say that I've known a world in which we had trade unions for police officers that were left-wing police officers. I mean, it was a different era. I didn't know you were that old. Yes, I mean, I lived when Mitterrand was president. I've known that, and it changes everything because you had people that wanted to become a police officer because they had different values and principles, and they were left wings, and there was no issue with that. Marie-Caroline. Yes, and young people that set foot in France, children that set foot in France, sometimes when you ask them what they want to be when they grow up, they tell you that they want to be police officers. They never say they want to be historians. No, they never say historians, I have to say. But they like the idea of order, which is quite interesting if you think about it. But to try and answer your question, I think it is part of the potential points of contact that we could have. So now we just have to, talk about what we could do and what we could develop. And I think, especially after what's been said, I don't think institutions became more rigid. It's not what I mean, especially not when it comes to research. I do feel that, on the contrary, that we have so many more gateways in between different worlds. I can see that with migration specifically. And I do think that the question of civil disobedience is actually quite present it's at the heart of our activities, right? Exactly when I see what happened with the SMA and what is probably going to happen. I mean, I work in a public hospital. When I can see that everywhere, you know, it says you have to ask staff documents, you have to ask for ID and everything. And the fact is that in the hospital, there is someone sick coming in. We just take that person in and we care for that person and we try and heal that person, treat that patient. Whichever the ID, whichever where that person's from. And I think we've been debating this over and over again. And I think this is part of the civil disobedience here. This is what I'm saying, is that we're no longer debating it, we're actually practicing it. Exactly. I mean, we talked about the law, we talked about rights, we talked about a law that is not being applied, and that's true. I mean, isn't it useless if you have a law that is enshrined somewhere, but it's just not applied in our daily life? Because then we can go to litigate, and you might win or you might lose, and it's not something that happens over a year. It can take 10 years before you actually get a sentence or a decision made by the court. And I think it's important for these people to keep on fighting, to keep on doing their job, but also be there so that they can put pressure. I think we had 130,000 expulsion requests that were made last year. Not even 10,000 were actually done, were actually executed. So yes, we have people working up there. It's a bit absurd. They don't really know what's happening in real life. But there are people that are ready to fight against that. And they're ready to fight back if something inhuman is being implemented. Florence.
I was about to talk about the mobilization around SMA. It was mentioned already. But what comes to my mind is that there is a strong resistance coming from the inside. I've been trying to think about this for years. It's great to have allies in the institutions. There are some people that are shocked. We need to rely on them. It's even more precious when you are at a crossroads, when you need to focus on networking. And we know that there are a lot of collectives, activists, that will be there. So we are meeting with some. There are some things that we do publicly, some things that we do, you know, that is not visible, so that we can continue to support the people that are faced with those violations of rights, that feel completely powerless. We do not give up on them. And I, at least, even though we cannot solve all individual situations, we need to help them and ensure their access to rights. And I'm convinced that mobilization is here. One more thing? Cécile? Marie-Caroline? Patrick, thank you so much for this amazing panel. Thank you for your questions as well. We're going to have a little break, and then we're going to have one presentation in English. So do not hesitate to grab a headset if you need one. Thank you, everyone, and see you soon.